Okay, welcome back. We are closing out chapter 4 with the second of two videos, and we're going to just focus on learning objective 4.2, the actual meat and potatoes of using this activity-based costing. And just as a quick recap, remember in chapter 3 and chapter 4, we're doing the same sort of thing. We're looking at manufacturing overhead and what's the best way to estimate it. In chapter 3, we decided the best way to estimate it was using one cost driver, just one thing to measure the manufacturing overhead. In chapter 4, we're doing the exact same thing. All we're doing is recognizing that perhaps businesses are a little bit more complex, that they've got different activities that require different cost drivers or measuring the overhead in different ways. So we just take that big pool of manufacturing overhead and divide it up into smaller pools, and we just measure them slightly differently depending on whether it's machine hours or direct labor or other means. So first it's just like chapter 3, and that all we're doing is estimating manufacturing overhead. And the reason why we use these additional cost pools is we want our costing to be accurate. We don't want to overcost or undercost, and having a few more cost pools allows us to be a little bit more accurate. Now the thrust and what these questions are going to look at, typically all of these, is going to be, well, let's look at this problem under one cost pool, the way we would do it under chapter 13. And then they're going to say, well, let's look at this under multiple cost pools, chapter 4. So, and then compare and contrast to see what are the benefits or what are the differences. So that's all we're doing. We're doing it partly by one cost pool, chapter 3, multiple cost pools, chapter 4. And we're just trying to figure out the manufacturing overhead. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at these. So this question is similar to question 5. And a lot of times, sometimes there's some text, and all I've done is make a chart of it, or I've kind of reduced the text to just the crucial amount. So you'll still have to read through the text and find the important bits of information. So here's some information given to us, and it's talking about, okay, well, here we've actually got 4 activities. So rather than just having one manufacturing overhead base, we've got 4 here. So if we notice, our total manufacturing overhead is $125,200. Now we have a couple of other things. Produces 1,000 products. These require parts, setups, and hours. And if you notice here, we've got parts, setup, and hours. Now, if you also notice, there are 2 things that use parts as a measuring thing. So it's not that we use one or the other, it's just that perhaps materials handling and insertion of parts both are best measured. The overhead associated with those things are best measured by parts. So we will use parts twice in this. So let's go ahead and figure out what is this allocation rate. So all I've done is pull down these numbers. So you can see 6,000 here. I've just moved it down here. Now, where do we get this allocation base? Well, this is in the text here. So you notice it says we're going to use 3,000 parts. So I would say, okay, this overhead divided by 3,000. Well, what we're saying is $2 per part. Machine setup, well, these are the setups, so 20. And so this would be 160. Again, we're going to use the parts again. It's not that you can only use them one time. Perhaps different overhead pools, cost pools, are best measured by the same thing. Maybe in time you would want to combine those two, since you're measuring them by the same thing, which is probably what I would do. But for right now, we're just using parts twice. And then finishing, 74,000 divided by, well, that's 2,000 hours, right? So that's the allocation base for this. So if you notice, we have, and that's 37. We have all of this manufacturing overhead, but we're going to divide it up according to these 4 different pools and apply it. Okay, so we have a couple of jobs, and each jobs, now, so just also a reminder of chapter 3, we would take the 2 estimates, right? The estimate of the total, whatever MOH it was, divided by the estimated total cost driver, and that gives us our rate. And then we take this rate, We take the rate and multiply it by the actual cost driver to get our allocation. And that is, if you remember, we talked about a step 1 and a step 2. So here we have done step 1. We figured out the rates, the 4 different rates. And now here in step 2, we're going to, in requirement 2, we're going to do this second step. So all I've done is pull, this is the information given in the problem, and all I've done is pull down. If you notice 2 right here, these items right here, 2, 160, 14, and 37, I've just brought these down so that we have them next to what we're going to be multiplying by. So material handling, well, material handling is by parts. So for this job, we used 150 parts. So if I multiplied 2 times 150, I would get 300, and this is my overhead. Same thing with machine setup. We had 3 setups. That's going to be 480. We had parts. Oh, we're going to use 150 again, right? I'll sneak a peek at the answer. It's going to be 2100. Finishing was 120 hours times $37 an hour. So that's 4,440. So for a total of 7320. So you can see these items, this was our rate. These are our rates that we figured out first, and then we're going to apply it to these are the actuals to figure out what was our cost to this particular job. And we'll do that one more time here with job 510. So we would just go through and say, okay, 475 parts, 6 setups, 475 parts, 310 hours, and then just do the multiplication across. So I'll just kind of fill in here. 950, 960, 6650, 11,470. So you notice in this question, all we've done is look at it according to the activity-based costing way. We haven't looked at it under a single costing pool. We looked at it under the multiple costing pool. So this question is kind of the easier one to kind of ease you into it. Okay, so let's take a look at question number 6, or one similar to question number 6. Here we are going to start getting into the comparison of the single rate versus the multiple rates. So here they're calling the single rate, they're calling it plant-wide rate. What they're just saying is, what if there was only one rate? And so we would say, okay, well, first of all, we would say if you did it according to one rate, what would the rate be? And here it's saying it's machine hours. So we have, these are the 2 numbers. These are our 2 estimates. Remember, we want to look at our 2 estimates. The company estimates that will incur this amount of costs for this amount of machine hours. So this is going to be a straightforward, just 2,100,000 divided by 15,000. And that comes up to a plant-wide rate of 140. Now remember, this is exactly what we did in chapter 3, and we said, okay, let's just have one cost pool, one cost driver, and figure out one rate. And so the idea here is, okay, well, what if we just use that one rate and figured out our costs? So here we have a job, and we're saying, you notice that the problem says just use the plant-wide rate, this 140. So you can see I've actually pulled it down here. This is the, oops, boy, this auto grid snap thing is annoying. Okay. I've just pulled this rate down from what we figured it out above. But now we need to figure out the rest of these things. So if you notice, we've got direct materials. Well, direct materials don't depend upon an estimate. We know that at the end of the month or at the end of the period. So we're just going to say, here, this is our direct materials right here. 270 times 45. And that's going to be 12,150. And direct labor, once again, that's something that we know at the end of the end of the period. And this is going to be 50 hours times 15, and that's like 750. Yep. And here we're going to use our plant-wide rate. And this is based upon, if you remember, this rate is based upon direct labor hours. So even though we have a bunch of things up here, we've got machine hours, change orders, all this other stuff, we're not actually interested in these. With just the one rate, all we're going to, machine hours. I'm sorry, the rate here is on machine hours. So we're not interested in, I should back that up. We are not interested in the change orders or the pounds of hazardous waste. We're just interested in machine hours as our method of estimating manufacturing overhead. So let me get rid of this one as well. I was getting a little too fast. So this is based upon machine hours. And so our machine hours is 140 machine hours used. And that comes out to 19,600. And so when we total it up, it comes to 32,500. So in other words, when we look at this particular job 355, using just one rate, we come up with 32,500. So what we're going to do next is, well, let's say, what if we use this more accurate multi-cost pool method? What will our costs look like then? Well, in fact, that's the next part of the question. So we figured out the one rate. Now we need to figure out the multiple rate. And what does that look like? So we just take the information given. So there in the red is the information that we were given. And rather than writing it in, I've just pulled this down. So you can see this goes here, this goes here. And so we're just going to figure out the rate. So this is 30, this is 50, yep. And this is going to be 270. So we just given the very simple information, and we now have, instead of one rate, which was, what was it, 140? The previous rate for just one rate was 140, but if we divide it up, it's 3 different rates. So now we just want to apply those rates. So here we've got our good old friend job 355 again. This is the exact same information that we had before, except for this is going to be direct materials. So that's direct materials. This is direct labor. But instead of doing manufacturing overhead only on this part, on the machine hours, we're going to use all 3 of these items to figure out the manufacturing overhead. And here, this 30, 50, and 270, I just pulled that down from what we learned here. So now I've got here in the green. So it's important to note here, I've got here in the green, this is the information that we figured out using the one cost pool. And now we're going to use the 3 cost pool version. So direct materials, well, that doesn't change. That's still 270 times 45. In other words, the direct items don't change. The only things that change are the indirect items, the overhead items. So this still comes out to, let me scroll on down here. It comes out to exactly the same thing. So that's an important thing to recognize, that under the 2 systems, the direct materials and the direct labor will come out to be the same, because those are directly measured and not estimated. So same with here, 50 times 15, well, that will give us that 750. And you can notice that these 2 costs are exactly the same. So now we will figure out, how do they differ? This was using the one rate, the 140, but now we're going to figure it out using the 2 rates. So let's put these in. So maintenance is 30 per machine hour. This is $50 per order, and this is $270 per pound. So let's scroll up. So there were 140 machine hours. There were 11 orders, and there were 90 pounds. So we calculate those, and they come out to 4,200, 550, and 24,300. Now I put this in green because I'm gonna add up these 3 to see what our manufacturing overhead looks like, but it's not going to be in the column of actual adding up. So I'll figure it out just for comparison's sake, and then I'll erase it and say we add up these five items. So when we add up just these 3 items, just the manufacturing overhead ones, we get a cost of $29,050. So it's not quite $10,000 difference, but it's quite a bit. And the reason is, if I had to guess, is that on average, perhaps other jobs don't use as much disposal, whereas this one used a lot of disposal. And that's the purpose of dividing up the manufacturing overhead. If one job uses more of an expensive item than another, then you want it to reflect that in the costs. So here, let's go ahead and I'll erase that. So I just wanted to show you what the difference in the costs were. But when we add it up, we get $41,950. And once again, you can see, because these two were the same. Boy, why does it do that? That really the difference in this total job cost is all due to the manufacturing overhead. And that's important for us to know, because that if this job actually costs more, then that means some other job probably costs a lot less, but we charged too much. So here we didn't charge enough. Some other job we probably charged too much. So inaccurate pricing, inaccurate billing hurts your company after a while. So that's just the question. Which cost estimate would provide more useful information? Well, just as I've been saying, the answer to this part is it allows you to price jobs better, and it gives you more accurate costs. And that's the big takeaway. Allows you to have more accurate costs. And accurate costs, you may say, well, I don't care about accuracy in the cost. Remember, if you undercost, if you don't have enough costs, then your price might be too low, so that when the costs come in, you don't make enough profit. Well, not enough profit is bad. And vice versa, if you overcost, you might be charging too high a price, and you would say, well, at least I'm getting the profit. But out in the marketplace, someone who's doing a better job of costing might have a more accurate cost, and therefore a lower retail price, and get the business away from you. Okay, so let's look at number 7. And again, we're going to go through the same process. Now, they may ask the questions a little differently. They may give you the information a little differently. But what they're looking at typically is, what is the manufacturing overhead and the total costing look like under one cost pool, and what does it look like under multiple cost pools? So here we have something where, okay, we're going to have some billing. Give some information about how to bill the job cost. They say whatever the job cost is, 140% of that is what we bill. You notice here, this is our direct labor, $68 per hour, and then it says we allocate based on hours spent on the job, and the company estimates this amount, this amount, this amount. So remember, when we're doing one allocation rate, we want to look for the estimates, right? So here's the estimate. So we get a bunch of this information. So you can see we've got transportation, blueprints, and office support. So here we're saying that there could be 3 cost pools, but we're going to first look at it under just one. Calculate the current allocation rate. So this is looking at it under just one. So the current allocation rate, we would say, well, what is the total amount of overhead? Well, that's our total amount of overhead, 244. And what is the total amount of estimated cost driver? Well, here it's the working hours. So that's 10,000. So this is a divided by, right? So we would say that comes out, if we're just using working hours as our means of doing it, it would come out to $24.40. So if we had this job, this current job of 20 hours, this one right here is where I'm looking at, 20 hours, 140 miles, 4 copies. So using just the single rate, we don't care about the miles, copies, and office hours. We just use the one rate. And how do we do this? Well, we have to remember we still have our direct labor. Our direct labor is still, we look here, $68, right? And we work 20 hours. So we would have 68 times 20, and that would give us, and then we would say, well, what is our overhead? And then we would say, and you notice that there's no materials in this particular one. Well, our overhead is at the rate of $24.40, and we're still using 20 hours because we're using that. So in other words, on top of what we charge for our labor, we're going to charge an extra $24.40 in overhead. And so that comes out to $488. So our cost for this job comes out to $1,848. And if we look back up here, how do they figure out what they're going to charge the customer? They're going to multiply it by 140%, which is a little bit different than the question that we did in chapter 3. And so that comes out to $2,587.20. That's what we would charge the customer to cover our labor and our overhead and to give us some profit. Okay, well, we're going to look at this same thing, but now, just like I said, instead of having one rate, we're going to figure out the 3 cost pool rate. So we knew it was coming, and here it is. So you can see, no big surprise. These numbers are just coming from here, 35,000, 200,000. Those are the different ones. And the different activity base, so this is a little sneaky. They have 2 different types of clients, and so they've broken out the total amount into 2 different groups. What we're looking for, remember, we're always looking for the total estimates, right? We're looking for the total activity cost and the total driver. So here, this driver is actually, well, how much is that? That's 15,000, right? So we would say our activity base is not 5,500 or 9,500, it's the total amount. And so that comes out to 60 cents. So here, this is 1,000, and this is 5,000. So we would put these in here. And that gives us, well, that's 35, and that's 40. So we previously had one rate of $24.40 based upon just hours worked, and now we've got a little bit more detailed, a little bit more accurate way to cost this job. So, well, we're going to do the same thing. Now, this is not part of the calculation. This is, once again, the arrow just never stays. This is what we calculated here. All I've done is pull down, this is how much we billed the customer using the one rate, and we're going to pull it down here just as a comparison. So this is just here to compare. Well, we're going to have our direct labor, and then we're going to have our 3 different types of manufacturing overhead to figure out here. So as you can imagine, just like in the previous question, this is going to be the same. It's going to be 68 hours times $68 an hour times 20 hours. That hasn't changed. And so that's still $1,360. So just like in the previous problem where the direct materials and direct labor stayed the same between the two, the only thing that was changing was the allocation of the manufacturing overhead. So here, the first one is, well, it's at 60 cents, and that's per mile. So how many miles did we have? Well, we had 140 miles. And that comes out to 84. And then the next one we have here is $35 per copy of the blueprints. How many blueprints did we have? We had 4 copies. And so that's 170, 140. And then the last one is $40 an hour for the office hours, the office support hour people. And so that's 13 hours that was billed to this. And that comes up to 520. So let's add it up and see what our comparison is. So these are 20, comes out to 2104. We're still multiplying it by the 140%. And this particular job, when we use the more accurate system, well, we wouldn't have charged enough here, right? We would have only charged $25.87, but it wouldn't have covered all of our costs. When we do a more detailed breakdown of our costs, we had more costs than we thought. Because you remember, when we use just the one cost pool, it averages it out over all the jobs. This way, we have a little bit more detailed and a little bit more accurate applying those costs to our to different jobs. So we would have undercharged the customer here and not made enough profit on this. Okay, so the final question of this is, well, which one is fair? Well, overcharge or undercharge. We're not maybe so interested in fair. I mean, obviously it's fair to the customer and it's fair to us if we charge accurately. But this is the point that we really want to look at. Well, the real thing that we're concerned about is we're billing according to the resources used. In other words, we don't want to overcharge or undercharge. We just want to charge for the resources used. And so this allows us to do that. Now, I did not do a homework number 8 because homework question number 8 is very similar to these first 3, 5, 6, and 7. So I'll leave 8 as one for you to kind of practice on without having kind of a step-by-step process. If you have questions, by all means, email me or see me during my office hours. Happy to walk through it. But I feel like maybe just giving you a chance to apply the lessons that you learned in the first 3 to the final one may be a good use of kind of practice. Okay, well, I will talk to you soon. And like I said, if you need to contact me, email or my office hours are the best way. And I will talk to you soon.